some sort of Islamic delegates on a different floor that didn't get it.
Must have been so.
Yeah.
For Jordan.
So just have to brace yourself for the retaliation.
Yeah.
That's the worry. Not that they weren't willing to harm us anyway.
Okay, so
On that.
let us learn. Yeah, in the Zuchus of the Refuah of Binyamin Ber Ben Chana. So we were learning yesterday that there's this cryptic midrash, halachic midrash, which seems to imply that even though the laws of biyomoti tein scharo and baltalin, the positive commandment of paying wages on the very day that services are rendered, not only applies to human services, but also applies to the service of animals and appliances. And therefore, you have to pay for a rental on the day that you make use of it. I guess maybe payment is due upon the end of the lease period. That would seem to be the reasonable assumption. But the Sifra says that only applies to things that are not attached to the ground. If something's attached to the ground, it is excluded. We saw in the Torah Tamima that Sifra doesn't make any sense because it seems to be in direct contradiction with another cited halacha that it should apply to everything. And so the Ktsos HaChoshen says that when it comes to rental properties, like a house or an apartment, something that was previously detached from the ground and was later attached to the ground would still be considered to be chattel for these purposes. Vilachein. And so therefore, bischirut dira tzarich lekayem mitzvat biyomot tein schara. When it comes to renting an apartment, a person is obligated to fulfill the mitzvah of paying biyomo on that same day. He has to pay the wages. The kol shekenim zeh dira miruhetet, and this is certainly true if it's a furnished apartment. Shavadai tzarich lekayem mitzvat biyomot tein scharo. Then you would certainly be obligated, kevin shechelek mehatashlum holech al harahitim, since a portion of the rental is going towards the furniture, and so then that certainly is considered to be chattel. Okay, now v'kasvu mishem Rabbeinu Ha'ari sha'adam shemekayim mitzvahs biyomoti tein scharo zoche l'tosefes nefesh ruach neshama b'shabbos shel oso shavua. Now listen to this one. He says the Ari is the source for this idea. If a person pays wages on time, then he gets an additional nefesh, ruach, and neshama, which is the composite of your spiritual essence on the Shabbos of that week. Ki, and now what's the basis? Biyomoti tein scharo. On that self-same day you shall give his wages. Bet, taf, and sin. You mix those letters together. Rosh Tevos Shabbos are that's the acronym for Shabbos. The Hashem Yizbarach Yizakenu Liyom Shekulo Shabbos Umenucha L'Chaye Holam. And may God give us the merit to see a day that is all Sabbath, meaning the world to come.
What does that really mean, though?
To receive that gift from you?
Yeah. What is it? What are you really getting extra there?
What do you get? It's good. It's a good thing to have, I'm sure.
But what is this? Let's make a deal. I mean, what do you want? What's behind
I
curtain
want
one?
behind the curtain. Yes.
What's behind? Yeah. Okay. All right. So there is that obligation of paying rent on time. Now, remember, we also pointed out that even if you negotiate with your landlord and he says, okay, you can pay it I know you're late, you can pay it a week later, you'll be off the hook from violating the mitzvahs lo saseh because he's given you that permission. However, you still will not have fulfilled the positive commandment. And a Jew should always strive to fulfill the positive mitzvah, right? Also, okay, so bottom line is pay your rent on time, and you'll be in accordance with the Torah's laws. So even though we thought initially when we first saw this shaila that biyomot titein scharo has nothing to do with paying rent, it only applied to services rendered by a human being, we've just learned in this tshuva that that's not at all the case, that it extends even to the rental or the lease of property, both chattel and real estate. Okay, now let's go on to the next tshuva. Chiyuv biyomot titein scharo b'socher dira migoy. Okay, do you have to pay the rent on time when you rent an apartment from a non-Jew? Ani socher dira miruhetet migoy b'schar chodshi. I am renting an apartment from a non-Jew. It's a furnished apartment. That's what the word miruhetet means. And I pay a monthly rent. Ha'im yesh alai chiyuv shel biyomot titein scharo l'shalem lo b'tchilat hachodesh. Am I under any biblical obligation to pay him the rent at the beginning of the month? V'im ani lo mishalem, ha'im ani over alav. And if I don't pay the rent on time, am I in violation of a negative commandment? Okay, so let's see the answer. Kasav ha'chafetz chaim b'sifro ahavas chesed. So the Chafetz Chaim writes in his Sefer Avas Chesed, shetashlum schar sochir hu davar ha'omed berumo shel olam sheyesh al zeh kama lavin. That paying a laborer on time is something that he says omed berumo shel olam, something that stands in the loftiest place in the world, which means it's a really, really important halacha. And because the repercussions are many negative commandments violated if a person doesn't do this. V'yesh b'nei adam shemizalzel bazeh mechoser yedi'ah u'ma'achrim hatashlumin shel hasachir. And there are people who deprecate this law simply out of ignorance, and they delay paying someone to whom they owe money for rendered services. Ve'ein havdel im hasachir ani o ashir. And it makes no difference whether the person that you owe the wages to is wealthy or poor. V'lo bischar poel elagam im sochar kelim yesh bo mitzvat biyomot titein scharo. This is not just for a laborer, but it's true if you lease or rent property, let's say appliances, there is a mitzvah to pay the wages for that rental on time. Kevin shekasuv b'Torah asher ba'artzacha. We saw this all in the previous tshuva, because the Torah says that you shall do this for the person who does labor for you in your land or upon your land. V'darshu rabotenu kol asher ba'artzacha afilu kelim. Anything that's upon your land, that includes even utensils. Aval al schar hakarka mamish kasav hatur b'shem harama she'eno oiver olav. However, the Tur cites the Rama that we saw in the previous tshuva, that for real estate, you're not in violation. We didn't know where the Tur where the Rama gets this from. Behavi oto maran b'shulchan aruch sham b'shem yesh misha omer. And the Mechaber brings this idea of as a yesh misha omer. There is an opinion that says that you're not in violation of baltolin with real estate. Avol b'sefer Yereim hevi lashon hatoras kohanim da'af b'sochar karka mamish over b'val talim. But the Sefer Yereim brings from the Sifra that says even for real estate you're in violation. Ve'ein lahakel b'isur deoraisa v'lachein gam b'schar karka yekayim mitzvahs b'yomot titein scharo. And one should not be lenient with a suffix whether there's a Torah violation being performed by delaying payment. And therefore, a person should always pay on time. Let me just see. right? And we're seeing the Sefer Sha'ar Mishpat a second time, and maybe we should take a look at that Sefer. B'chol shekain lefi ma shekasav haktzos hachoshen, diyesh poskim debayas mikri davar talush v'lo karka. And this is certainly true based on what the Ktzos writes, who says that some say that a house or an apartment is really not considered to be real estate because it was something that was detached that was later attached. Kevin shahavanim hayu tlushim ve'achar kach banu mehem bayis, v'talush ulabasot chibro yesh lachush be'isr deoraisa l'das haposkim sheyesh lo din talush. That anything that the repercussions are in isr deoraisa, you should perhaps be worried about this issue that you may be in violation. So that's also a consideration, and therefore you should be machmir when it comes to real estate as well. V'nosaf al kol hanal b'nidon ha'she'ela shesachar dira meruhetet chelek metashlum haschirut wala rahitim shezeh sachar kelim u'bevadai sheyesh bazeh mitzvahs b'yomot titein schara. In addition to this is what about a furnished apartment? He says a portion of the rent is going towards the furniture. And so then there's certainly what to argue about having to pay on time, because certainly a portion of the rental are furniture and appliances,
which aren't attached.
All right. Ulam ein bal habayit over mishum bal tolin ela im tava oto hapoel. Aval im lo tava oto. He says, however, you're only in violation of bal tolin, the negative commandment. In other words, there may be an obligation of the positive commandment even without the worker demanding payment, right, or giving you the invoice. But so long as the worker has not demanded payment, you're not in violation of the negative commandment. Similarly, if he demands payment and you simply don't have any money, so then you're not in violation of the negative commandment. But you've also squandered the positive commandment of not paying him on time. Let's just see this. That's also paskind in Shulchan Aruch. Okay. So as far as the fact that the landlord is a non-Jew, there's a machlokas of the poskim whether it is permitted to delay payment to a non-Jew. Yesh omrim sheyesh gam begoy mitzvahs aseh shel biyomot titein scharo aval ein bo es halav shel bal tolin. There is an opinion that says that the positive mitzvah certainly applies of giving him his wages on time, but the negative commandment does not apply. And where do we know this from? Ki kasuv b'mishnah deger toshav yesh bo mishum biyomot titein scharo ve'ein bo mishum lo tolin pu'ulat sachir. The Mishnah in Bava Metzia writes that a ger toshav, a righteous Gentile, you have, because like we saw in Rashi when we learned the pasuk in Chumash, we learned that kol asher bisharecha or kol asher ba'artzecha, right, includes all workers, including non-Jewish workers. But that's only for the positive commandment, but not for the negative commandment. Uperesh Rashi ger toshav shekibel alav lo la'avod avodah zara va'ochel nevelo sutrevos. And Rashi explains that the definition of a ger toshav is that he is righteous in the sense that he doesn't worship idols, but he still eats non-kosher food because there's no commandment for him to abstain from non-kosher food. V'chein pasuk HaRambam diyesh mitzvahs biyomot titein scharo beger toshav, and that's how the Rambam paskins as well. Aval b'sefer ha-mitzvah sosif ha-Rambam shemitzvah zu mechuyevet b'chol schir yom va'afilu b'ven Noach. But the Rambam even adds that says that every laborer is included in this mitzvah, implying that even the negative commandment is included, even a Gentile. So therefore, the Rambam is even more machmir, that even the negative commandment would apply to a Gentile as well. V'yesh omrim, Shemuter laholin scharo. But then there's a third opinion of, he says this is the opinion of the Ritva. And he says that there is no mitzvah of biyomoti tein scharo for a non-Jew. The kaven shehu safek de oraisa yesh lahachmir. But we're dealing with a safek de oraisa, and therefore you have to be stringent, and you have to therefore make sure that the Gentile is included in this halacha. V'lachein, and therefore, gam b'schirus dira migoy tzorich lekayem mitzvahs aseh shall biyomoti tein schara. You have to fulfill the positive commandment of paying his wages on time. So this tshuva has only added for us the additional issue that this mitzvah applies for a Gentile as well. We had surmised that as such, right? I think you had asked that question early on, Ron. But it seems that the consensus is, and this is how Rav Sharaga paskins, that paying someone on time applies to the Gentile as well. So that fellow that I told you about, who stiffed the Gentile, was really doing a very bad thing. Okay. Okay, let's go on to the next tshuva. Kiye mitzvahs biyomo titein scharo b'chatzi shiur. Paying a person on time when there's only half wages. So what does that mean? Sacharti kablan sheyeshapetz li et hadira b'sikum shel 20,000 shekel. So I hired a contractor to renovate my apartment, and the fee that I was going to pay was 20,000 shekel, which I guess was worth more when this tshuva was written. I mean, it's like what, $5,000, $7,000 Canadian, 8,000 Canadian. Okay, so it's not a huge job, but it's a significant job. V'ganan she'yishtol li shtilim v'yetafeach li et hagina b'sikum shel 20,000 shekel. I also hired a landscaper who would plant me new bushes, I guess, or plants, and populate my garden, and that was also going to be for 20,000 shekel. B'sach hakol higia hasikum shel 40,000 shekel. So my total bill for this renovation job is 40,000 shekel. Zman hapiraon l'shalim l'shneim hu biyom rishon hakarov. So I have to pay them. The payment is due this Sunday. V'cha'et yesh li rak 20,000 shekel. I only have 20,000 shekel. I got a 40,000 shekel bill, 20,000 to this guy and 20,000 to this guy. I only have 20,000 currently. Ha'im etein l'kol echad chatzi scharo kedei l'shalim l'shneim b'shaveh. So I have two choices. I can give partial payment to both, or etein la'echad et kol hasikum kedei l'kayim mitzvahs biyomo titein scharo b'shleimus. Or I could pay one guy his complete bill and leave the other guy hanging. So at least with one of them, will have fulfilled the mitzvah of biyomo titein scharo, pay him his wages on time. And the other guy, I'll deal with separately. So what do you say?
No, the expense of the other guy.
It doesn't have to do work at all.
Work's been finished.
Well, the work's done.
Work's done.
You gotta split it. You gotta split it.
Have to do that for each.
Do without the mitzvah.
I'm doing emotional at the expense of somebody else.
Right. And also, perhaps you could argue that there's a partial fulfillment of the mitzvah if you give partial payment. That's really the premise of this shaila, right? Okay.
Because you're causing other issues, right? You're causing distress, you're causing that person
well, you're going to cause distress to both parties if you only give partial payment. I mean, payment is due. Payment is due. You got to pay the 20,000 shekel to each guy. So how do you deal with it?
Well, you borrow money, work for every person, too.
Well, we learn that halacha, right? That you're obligated to even borrow the money in order to fulfill this mitzvah. Okay. All right. Bedin ma'avid shetzarich l'shalim l'shnei po'alim v'yesh lo l'shalim rak le'echad mehem. And we also learned, don't hire someone to do work for you unless you have the money to pay them. So what happened then? I mean, like, how did this happen that you hired two parties for a $40,000 job and you only have half the money? Like that's pretty irresponsible, right? You don't hire someone if you don't have the money to pay them. So this is a very b'diavad situation to begin with. Im yitain la'echad mehem bizman hu vada yikayim mitzvahs biyomot yitain schar lefachot bo. So he says, on the one hand, if you pay one of them in full, you'll have fulfilled that mitzvah with that guy for sure. Aval im yitain lekol echad chetzi, yesh ladun ha'im yikayim bazem mitzvat biyomot yitain scharo b'chatzi shir olo. But if you give each contractor half, could you argue that you fulfilled at least a partial mitzvah of biyomot yitain scharo? In other words, we have this concept of chatzi shir, of halfway. So, for example, chatzi shir, the Gemara talks about chatzi shir asr min haTorah. And the Gemara determines that in order to be in violation of eating on Yom Kippur, you have to eat enough to food the size of a date. It's a little bit larger than a kazayas, right? And if you haven't eaten the size of a date, technically you're not in at least biblical violation of Yom Kippur. But then the Gemara also says that chatzi shir asr min haTorah, that eating deliberately half when there's no reason to medically for you to break your fast is a biblical prohibition. So there's the concept of a portion of a measurement that is a substantive concept. Will it work as far as this as well, that I have an obligation to pay, but if I pay a portion of the payment, is that at least a partial fulfillment of the mitzvah? That's really the question.
Now, there's also a factor as to, let's say the two contractors finish their jobs in the same day, which contractor finished the job first? If one guy finished by noon, is he entitled to payment for Yomo earlier than the other guy who finished the same day?
I don't believe that there's, I guess, I don't believe that because payment is not due until the end of the day. So it would seem that it shouldn't make a difference. I mean, you're at I'm just giving you my thoughts here. It shouldn't make a difference that one guy finished the job. If they both finished the job on the same day, or if there was a negotiated contract that payment is due on Sunday, even if one guy finished it on Tuesday, the other guy finished it on Thursday, it really shouldn't make a difference because the contract was,
Secular law is the same. They don't take hours of the day and say which one's first.
They don't take hours of the day, but what about separate days?
Yeah.
Well, certainly like in bankruptcy law, you always go to the first, because there you're dealing with issues of, creditorship, right? So the earlier the creditor, the higher priority he takes in extracting from the estate, right? And that's true in Jewish law also, right? If you have two separate creditors and one creditor is earlier than the other, so then he gets priority he gets first dibs on the payment of a limited estate. But here both contracts are due on the same day. So maybe we'll just start this and then we'll have to, unfortunately, I gave my disc to this guy. I haven't heard back from him yet. So I'm hoping, is it possible that I'll get it back by tomorrow? I don't think so. We'll have to I'll prepare something else that we can learn tomorrow that's related to this halacha. in the event that I'm not able to find Rav Shraga's Sefer anywhere else. In any event, he says, Hinei b'gemara b'maseches yom anechluku Rabbi Yochanan v'reish Lakish, ha'im chatzi shur b'isurin aser mehatorah o midurabana. So there's a machlokas between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Is chatzi shir, when it comes to prohibitions, is it a biblical law or is it a rabbinic law? L'mashal, ha'ochel nevela utreifa over ala veloke, rakim ochel kazayis. So the example is, if a person eats a non-kosher piece of food, he only gets malchus if he eats a kazayis, an olive size worth of that food. Aval pachos mikazayis, but if he eats less than that measurement of food, he eats a half a kazayis, L'das Rabbi Yochanan afal pi shalom mekabel malchus mikol makom over al iser Torah afilu shezeh chatzi shir. So this is the machlokas. Rabbi Yochanan says you're not going to get malchus, but you still are in biblical violation of the Torah law. You've still been over on the prohibition of eating on Yom Kippur. Aval l'das Reish Lakish zeh iser derabanan, zeh aser miderabanan. But according to Reish Lakish, it's only a rabbinic prohibition. V'hahalacha ke Rabbi Yochanan shechatzi shir aser min haTorah kamo shekasav haramba. We paskin like Rabbi Yochanan that eating even less than a kazayas of something that's forbidden is biblically prohibited, even though you're not going to get the punishment for that violation. Amnam kol zeh belavin, but that's all with negative commandments. Aval hashe'elahi ha'im gam b'mitzvahs asay mekayim mitzvah keshemekayim b'chatzi shir. The question here is, what about a positive commandment? Do you fulfill a positive commandment if you've only done it halfway? Kagon b'mikre hazeh she'im yitain l'chol echad chatzi mischar. Like I could hear, here's the possibility. If I eat only half a kazayas of matzah the night of the Seder, have I fulfilled the mitzvah of achilas matzah? Here, it's as it pertains to a Choshen Mishpat shaila, if I've only given each person half of his wages, have I fulfilled the mitzvah of halfway of biyomot titein schara? Ha'im yikayim bazeh mitzvahs biyomot titein schara b'chatzi shir. Okay. He says, V'hinei das harab shvus yankiv, he de'ein mitzvah b'chatzi shir klal, v'hevi lazeh raya mehilchos shavuos. He brings the Shvus Yaakov, I think that's Rav Breish, says that there is no mitzvah of chatzi shir at all when it comes to a positive commandment, and he brings proof from this from Hilchos Shavuos. And that's where we're going to have to hold it here for today. And I will, Be'ezras Hashem, have more of this tshuva for you, God willing, tomorrow. Okay? So have a wonderful day, everybody.